Once upon a time, there was a man named James who lived in a small village called Ravenswood. Ravenswood was deep in the woods of the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by towering trees and dense foliage. It was a remote and isolated place with a small population of residents who lived off the land. James was tall and handsome, with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed to sparkle with intelligence. He was always dressed impeccably in a suit and tie, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity. He had a deep love of knowledge and a passion for science, and he spent most of his days in his laboratory researching and experimenting. One day, a strange disease swept through the village and many people began to fall ill. James was determined to find a cure, and he spent countless hours researching and experimenting in his laboratory. At first, James's methods were harmless, and he only wanted to save lives. He collected herbs and plants from the surrounding woods to create tonics and remedies. He also used his knowledge of anatomy and physiology to try to understand the workings of the disease and how it could be cured. But as time passed and more people fell ill, James became increasingly desperate to find a cure. He started to take shortcuts and make dangerous decisions. The once kind and compassionate man was slowly losing his sanity. One day, James stumbled upon a book in the village library. The book was bound in leather, and its cover was adorned with strange symbols that seemed to glow in the darkness. As he opened the book, James felt a chill run down his spine. The pages were yellowed with age and the ink was faded, but the writing was still legible. As he read it, he felt a strange sense of unease. The book had an eerie effect on him, and he felt as though he was being watched. Despite this, he was drawn to one recipe and its promise of a cure. He became obsessed with finding the rare ingredients and creating the elixir. The book was his only source of information on the elixir, and as he delved deeper into its pages, he felt himself being pulled into its dark and dangerous world. The ingredients required the sacrifice of living creatures. Despite the risks, James became obsessed with making the elixir, and his madness deepened. He began to capture animals from the surrounding forests and use them in his experiments. Soon after, people in the village began to disappear, and rumors spread that James was behind it all. Despite the fear and rumors, James continued to work on his elixir, becoming more and more isolated from the world around him. Finally, the day came when James succeeded in making the elixir. He drank it, believing that he would be cured of his madness and would finally be able to help others. But instead, the elixir only made James's madness worse. He had become a monster in every sense of the word. His once kind and gentle demeanor had given way to a cruel and sadistic nature. He was no longer the man he once was. His once neat hair was wild and unkempt, and his once pristine lab was now a mess of beakers, vials, and body parts. The villagers whispered about the strange smells and noises that came from the laboratory, and the rumors of what went on inside grew more and more terrifying with each passing day. In the end, the villagers banded together, determined to put an end to the terror that had gripped their once peaceful village. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find and set out to James's laboratory, determined to stop him once and for all. As they approached the lab, they could hear the sounds of madness coming from within. James was ranting and raving, the voices in his head growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment. The villagers hesitated, afraid of what they might find, but they pushed on, driven by fear and anger. When they burst into the laboratory, they were met with a scene of horror. James was surrounded by bodies and body parts, his experiments having taken a dark and twisted turn. The elixir was everywhere, its dark and malevolent presence filling the room. James was wild-eyed and frothing at the mouth, his once handsome features now twisted into a mask of madness. The villagers hesitated, but then they sprang into action. They attacked James, striking him with their weapons and trying to bring him down. He fought back with incredible strength, but the villagers were relentless, driven by a righteous fury, and eventually they succeeded in bringing James down. With James defeated, the villagers burned the laboratory to the ground, destroying any trace of the elixir and the horrors that had taken place there. And as the fire consumed the building, the voices in James's head fell silent, leaving behind only the sound of the villagers' triumphant cries. The nightmare was over, but the memory of what had taken place in Ravenswood would haunt them for the rest of their lives.